So the year that I was 11 was a weird year for a bunch of reasons. The two most important ones are I started to get migraines for the first time in my life, something I unfortunately still deal with now. And the other thing that happened that year was I started the year in grade 6 and ended the year in grade 7. I was skipped kind of midway through the year. I was a small 6th grader and a completely outclassed 7th grader. And my parents, who were, people, and not really great at things like parenting, used the fact that I was getting migraines and was absent from school a whole bunch to explain to the school administration that the reason that she's suffering from these migraines, the doctors have said they didn't, is because she's so bored in class that it's causing this psychosomatic whatever, because they thought it would be really cool to have a kid who skipped a grade, and the school was like, oh my god, absolutely, of course, we'll try whatever to hope this poor child, we don't want her to be suffering from migraines. So what ended up happening is, in addition to being in pain a lot, I didn't really, 2 years happened in one, and it meant I was 13 when I went into high school, and sort of everything bad in my life ever happened because of that. But so it was a weird year, and I was a weird kid to begin with, and it made me weirder. And when you are completely out of depth and have no real way to relate to anybody around you, you resort to some pretty extreme measures to try to make friends. So a couple months after I had been skipped a grade, a new kid came to the school. And new kids mean you can start fresh. They don't know all the horrible shit that clings to you. So maybe if you can leap in quick enough and make a good impression, they won't hate you like everybody else does. So I kind of pounced on the new kid and was we are going to be friends. I for sure know we're going to be friends. This was my tactic. Hey, new kid whose name is Virginia, would you like to meet the tree? There's a demon in it who writes me letters. So for my birthday that summer, my parents had given me a calligraphy set. And I thought it would be really cool to, in a kind of screw tape letters-y kind of style, start writing a short story that was really just an epistolary whatever blah thing that were letters from a demon. Total screw tape letter ripoff. But because I led with this in my friend-making tactic, I started stowing these letters in this big gnarled knotted tree in my schoolyard. And the 11-year-old seemed to buy it. And so for a while, over a period of weeks and maybe a couple of months, this was the basis of our relationship. We were the two, secret people who knew that the big, scary tree in our schoolyard was for sure possessed by a demon. And, I would manage to sneak one in there every few days, and we'd check every day, and every once in a while there would be a letter, and it would be, ooh, it was so scary. And somehow we had this, little bizarre sort of fan fiction in the real world friendship. It was one of my first real ones. One day, I wrote her a letter that must have been a little bit scary, a little bit scarier than usual. I may push the envelope a little bit too much. And she was like, maybe I should tell my mom that there's for sure a demon that lives in this tree. I quietly panicked because I thought, I would learn later incorrectly, that if somebody went to a grown-up with a story, it's yo, for sure there's a demon living in this tree, the grown-up would call bullshit on that super fast, and I would get in a lot of trouble really quickly. So I decided I had to try and head this off at the pass. So my brilliant solution was oh, don't tell anybody, don't worry. If you're feeling a little bit scared, I have something that can protect you. I had this really ugly, huge pewter dragon ring with a little probably paste red eyeball jewel in it. Very, very hideous, very in a couple of years I'd be ooh, I'm a witch. It's that kind of pre-baby pagan thing. And I made up a story on the spot, which was, before you moved here, the demon who lives in the tree gave me this ring as a present to protect me. Did I mention I was a weird kid? I win the Weird Kid Olympics, my friends. If you ever look at your past and you're like, wow, I was really a weird kid. Nah, man. Did you make a demon live in a tree? I don't want to hear about it. So I was like, oh yes, the demon for sure gave me this disgusting pewter ring that I wear every day for no reason. So if you're freaked out, why don't you wear it for a little while? I'm sure it will protect you. Everything will be cool. That night, I went home, and in the evening, I got a migraine. It was a particularly bad one, which meant we had to drive to the hospital in Windsor, which is about 45 minutes away. They give me a whole bunch of painkillers because hospitals in Windsor, Ontario, the armpit of Canada, aren't super great on things like, responsible medical care. We'll just give the child a bunch of opiates, and sent me home, and then I was home for a couple of days. And eventually, 2-3 days later, went back to school. So now there's a part of this story that I'm not present for. All I can do is infer. So when I got to school 2 or 3 days later, I was still moving slow in the morning. I ended up missing the bus. One of my parents drove me and dropped me off. And so I'm walking across the schoolyard to the portable where my class is, and I notice there's still a bunch of people in the schoolyard, and they're gathered around a tree. The tree. They're not kids, they're grown-ups. There's the principal and a couple of teachers and a guidance counselor and a couple of priests, I think, and one dude with a particularly big weird hat. And I start walking a little bit slowly, and I'm like, okay, I'm in very serious trouble now. So what I believe happened, what I've reconstructed following these events is, so in my poor little friend's mind, I gave her my demonic protection ring and immediately vanished. Right? So she had a meltdown and told her mom. Now, this should have been the end of the story, one would think, because as I had sort of thought earlier, oh, you tell a grown-up, yo, there's a demon living in this tree, the grown-up's gonna be obviously there isn't. I guess the detail that I left out that is suddenly relevant now is I went to Catholic school. But small town Ontario Catholic school, real Catholic school. Not so Catholic that we had a kid who was astigmatic. That was a couple of schools over that kid. But our school was for sure Catholic enough that I was born left-handed and can no longer write that way. I may be the youngest person in the world who this has happened to. So that level of Catholic. So when my friend told her mom, was not obviously that's not happening. Who's this weird ass kid you're hanging out with? Instead, she was like, holy shit, there's a demon in a tree. Went to the school administration who were like, holy shit, there's a demon in a tree. Who contacted the school's priest, because we were all assigned one. The priest decided to contact the Archdiocese of London. And that is how a bishop showed up. So when I walked into my classroom, there was perhaps a minor uproar, as my parents hadn't, told the school, oh, they didn't do that thing where they, you call to report that your kid is sick and oh, they're coming back now. They just I was gone and then I was back. There wasn't really a great reporting system here. So there was some, it was a bit shocking when I arrived. Not most certainly not in hell anymore. And so via some reconstruction, and we then had to have possibly the world's most awkward parent-teacher interview ever, where my parents were called in, and the school tried to explain to my parents why clearly, if the tree was not possessed, because I did fess up, it seemed like the best way to go about this. If the tree was not possessed, certainly I was. Because how could an 11-year-old girl have come up with these ideas? And my friend Virginia had kept all of the letters I had written, and so they had this evidence that, like, no 11-year-old could come up with something this diabolical. I'm like, I don't know, man. I watch a lot of horror movies. I'm not really, like, supervised or anything, so I really have a lot of material to pull from. So the upshot of the terrible, terrible parent-teacher interview, where my mom was the most furious I think I have ever seen her, until the day I told her I was going to elope instead of having a big wedding. And my dad thought it was hilarious. Right up until the point where the archdiocese was like, well, we were going to exorcise the tree. Probably we should exorcise your daughter. So they went back and forth a bit. My parents absolutely refused the exorcism. Hooray for me. And in the end, they were sort of had to be satisfied with a mere blessing of the tree and the school grounds provided by the bishop, who, to be fair, seemed pretty annoyed by the whole thing. My ring was confiscated, so I like to imagine like it's in a tiny plexiglass box in the Vatican somewhere. Makes me very happy to think about. And my dad continued to think it was mostly funny right up until the point where the archdiocese sent my parents a bill, because it turns out exorcisms are not cheap. And Catholics super love getting money for their religious rituals. And in fact, my not exorcism cost a little bit more than my wedding. The end.